Morning, guys. So today we're going to be looking at the Middle Ages versus the Renaissance, specifically in relation to literature. So yesterday when we started talking about the Middle Ages, we started to discuss the idea that the Middle Ages was really full of religious ideas and focused kind of on mainly on salvation and how believers could become go to heaven and whatnot. Whereas the Renaissance was really focused on these humanistic ideas, and we're going to see that in the comparison of the literature. So in this particular excerpt from the Middle Ages, we're going to read through this and kind of break it down line by line exactly what each line means. So the very first one, ye man think sin in the beginning full sweet. So what we're talking about here is if we take out ye, that's kind of talking about like everyone, it's kind of like you in Old English. What this line is saying essentially is that man maybe thinks that sin at first is nice, right? So like sinning is always kind of it's a sweet thing. It may be pleasurable, right? So like overeating, like having another piece of cake is always a good thing at first, and then you eventually get a bellyache. So it's essentially saying that in the beginning, sin feels good, but which in the end causeth thy soul to weep. So in the end, sin ultimately leads us to weep. Their soul feels bad about what you did, so you feel guilty afterwards. And then it goes on to say, when the body lieth in clay. So this is what this kind of phrase here is talking about. Notice that this is one sentence. It is a poem, okay? That this whole sentence is talking about how, like, during our lives, we may sin. It probably feels good when we're sinning. But ultimately, when the body lieth in clay, aka when we die, it's causing our soul to weep, right? Where our soul is sad, we are regretful, and they're going to kind of go on and tell us exactly why. Here shall you see how fellowship and jollity, so jollity is kind of like jolly, so like Santa Claus is jolly. So you see how fellowship, meaning friendships, relationships with other people, and being jolly, both strength, pleasure, and beauty will fade from thee as a flower in May. So here's what it's saying. It's saying here you're going to see how friendships and jolly, they bring strength, pleasure, and beauty, but they fade from you. So they're not going to last very long. As a flower in May will wilt, will fade, will go away. So all of these good feelings, they're going to eventually go away. For ye shall hear how our heaven king is obviously talking about God, calleth every man to judgment day. So what this is talking about here is this is saying that God eventually is going to call every single person to judgment day, aka that day in which you are called to be judged by God about whether or not you're going to heaven or hell. So that's essentially what this is saying. Give audience and hear what he doth say. So essentially what this whole thing is saying is that you might sin during your lifetime, but ultimately when you die, it's going to cause your soul to weep, to be upset, because all these kind of pleasures in life, they fade quickly, but ultimately you're leading your life toward going to heaven or hell, and God is going to judge you on that. You're going to have to give him an audience, meaning that you're going to have to come before him and ask him for a judgment. So this really goes to show the Middle Ages kind of perspective on what life was like. Again, that focus on religion here, so focus on salvation, that your life and the actions that you take should be focusing on that salvation. So it's essentially saying avoid sin, because those things they're frivolous, they're very short-lived, they may bring you pleasure in the moment, but ultimately you're living to go to heaven, and so your actions need to support that. Okay, so when we're looking at here the moral values, it's really that you need to avoid sin in order to go to heaven. Okay, I just want to make sure that we're kind of here. Okay, so the Renaissance piece. Okay, we can remember the Renaissance, we're looking at humanism, that human experience, a focus on human emotion. You'll notice that this particular excerpt is from Shakespeare. Okay, it's from a different play from Shakespeare called Hamlet. Okay, so he was one of the premier playwriters during the Renaissance period. He starts off with this very humanistic idea. What a piece of work is man, right? Anybody ever heard the phrase like that person is a piece of work? When we're talking about a piece of work, we're talking about complex, how complicated, but in a good way, right? So if somebody's a piece of work, it means that they're complex. It means that they are they're different, they're complicated, but it's a kind of a good thing here is what he's saying. How noble in reason. So again, that focus on the humanistic ideas of logic and reason, being able to think through things, that man has been given that gift. How infinite in faculty. What he's talking about here is faculty means ability, right? So infinite meaning like you have a massive amount here, like Infinity Wars, in X-Men, not X-Men, Marvel, right? Faculty means like your work. So what he's essentially saying here is, wow, man is incredible. They're able to think, they're so intelligent, they're able to do anything they put their mind to, okay? Then he goes on to say, in form, moving, how express and admirable. So what he's saying here is like in the man's ability to move, to express themselves is beautiful. It's admirable. They're able to show their feelings. In action, how like an angel. So looking here, specifically comparing man to angelic beings, to these godlike beings here, that would have been a very outlandish idea, different idea for this time period, coming from where man in the Middle Ages wasn't even good enough to get to heaven because they were so sinful. Now Shakespeare's comparing man to godlike beings and angels. In apprehension, how like a god. So apprehension is another word for like knowing, for having this ability to just know things. So essentially he's saying here, man knows things like God does. So again, making a comparison between man and God, which was a very almost crazy idea during this time period, to be comparing men to God, coming from the time period in the Middle Ages where man couldn't even compare to God at all. He goes on to say that the man is the beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. Paragon is a vocabulary word here that means perfect example. Okay, so a paragon is somebody who is a perfect example of animals. Man is the king of the animals, essentially. And so you kind of get this idea here that this is very different from the Middle Ages. This one is essentially saying that man is wonderful, man is beautiful, man is all-knowing, man is godlike, made in God's image. Whereas in the Middle Ages, they're kind of talking about this idea that you're not going to make it to heaven because you're a sinner, right? And so the whole mood of the literature is also different, focusing less on this depressing idea of whether you're going to make it to heaven or not, and really changing to focus on, well, God made man in God's image. They're the king of the animals. That's what God made him to be. Man knows all things. They're super able to do things. And so this is a completely different feeling. It's a completely different mood than this one here, who essentially is talking about how you're never going to get to heaven. Okay, so these value very different things, but they do kind of give us a good idea for how the Middle Ages and the Renaissance did compare. Thanks for joining me for this one. Tomorrow we're going to start looking at art.